Okay, welcome everybody to the Culture Clinic show where we help people leaders like you shape great workplace culture so that their people feel appreciated, connected, inspired to do the best work of their life. And my name is Skay. I'm one of the founders here at Gusto. Been helping HR leaders build recognition programs to shape great workplace culture for about the last 10 years. And I'm joined by my colleague, Kwesi. Want
Hi
to do a quick
everyone.
intro for us, Kwesi?
Hi everyone. My name is Kwesi Thomas. I've been in HR for the better part of 20 years now, and worked in some of Canada's largest corporations, so BlackBerry and Nortel and Shopify, and then on my own for the last little while, consulting and helping small businesses grow. And just love seeing cultures get built and understanding how they get built and how they get up and working.
Awesome. So reminder to the audience joining us, this is Ask Us Anything kind of format. So if you've got questions related to kind of today's topic or anything kind of broadly related to culture recognition, we'd love to hear those. So feel free to drop those in the comments, whether you're tuning in on LinkedIn or YouTube there. Today's topic, Kwesi, is all around kind of measuring culture, right? And people often talk about how culture is this kind of soft thing that's difficult to measure. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that case. There's more and more data that can help us as people leaders kind of measure the impact of our culture initiatives. So let's dive into this. Out of the gate, every company kind of defines culture a little bit differently. So I think it's important for companies to kind of like get clear on how they're defining culture, right? And what sort of culture they're trying to kind of create, so that they can kind of zone in on a few metrics. But how do you define culture really quickly before we dive into some of the questions here?
I try to make it the least complicated I can. To me, this is how the people act in a broader way towards each other, how they act themselves, the norms that they do, how they communicate, how they the shared language they use, the shared experiences they have, the shared tendencies, the things you've been to expect, how people treat each other. Not different when we use the word culture outside of work. So for me, this is defining what parts of your culture you want to emphasize or build or focus on is really when we talk about defining culture, because there'll be a broader base of what happens in your company anyway. But it's one of those things that you want to make sure are key or that are common. People can call it out right away, that are in the culture at work. And so to find those 3, 4, 5 things, I don't think you get much higher than that because it gets too diluted and too low. You just haven't defined enough. So I'm in the 3, 4, 5 range personally. Define what those things are. Make it very clear on what you're going to focus on, and then as we're talking about today, we're talking about measuring. Now we can talk about measuring them, but defining them is really important.
And when I think internally here at Gusto, kind of how we define culture for our organization, it's really kind of a shared way of doing things, right? So our first kind of like question here, and this one's mine before we jump to kind of some of the audience questions that we've gotten kind of the last week. Why should we measure culture? Like, what's the benefit to doing this?
I mean, with not measuring it's a challenge, but why you should measure it. You need an unbiased way of seeing how you're performing against your goal. And to me, that's often is numbers. It really is a way of seeing how you're performing or how things are progressing, not even performing towards your goal. And they are also a good way of measuring if you are not meeting it. And so often we can use non-metric ways of saying, hey, I think we're doing okay, but it's really easy to say, hey, we were a 6 out of 10 and then we did some stuff and now we're an 8 out of 10, right? And so I think measuring is important because it lets you know how you're actually doing, and it takes away all of that bias of what you think you're doing, especially for the one running the programs, thinking that your programs are successful. You might want to take away that bias as well.
Yeah, and the big win here, right, is going to be able to getting approval for more programs, right? As people leaders, we we're big champions for kind of investing in our people and culture programs. But if we have the evidence to kind of support the impact that these programs are having, it's going to make it much easier to either grow those programs or add new programs, right? So, okay.
I want to double click on that for a second. We measure everything else. We measure leads coming in. We measure sales performance. We measure, developer performance. We measure all sorts of other metrics in our business depending on what we're doing, right? How about, returns, everything else. Most companies, the biggest budget line in your budget is probably your people. So not measuring how we're managing those people just seems silly. We're measuring everything else down to the nth degree, right? So we should put some numbers on what is most probably your largest spend in whatever organization you're in. It's probably your people, right? So this makes sense.
Awesome. And I see a question here from Aaron. What are other recommended and creative ways of measuring engagement, culture, aside from engagement surveys? It's a really good question. And Aaron, I think we'll get to it because our first question here from Anthony is around engagement surveys. So let us tackle that first. And then there's some more questions, outside of engagement surveys. So let's dig out on surveys because this is the obvious one, right? And so Anthony asks just like, how should I best use surveys to measure culture?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the useful part of the surveys are in the actual details of the questions. The overall big metrics that you get from these surveys like ENPS and those type of things, they're great directional numbers and they're great to pat ourselves on the back, but they don't really tell you what you're going to do, what you're doing well, what you need to improve on. And so getting down into the actual responses to your questions are to me, are more important than the actual overall big numbers that come out of these surveys. That's how I work anyway. And designing those specific questions, they need to be actually thought through pretty well. There are lots of companies that help you do that these days, but you need to make sure if you're parts of your organization you're trying to measure or trying to understand how you're progressing today or how you're going to progress over the next year or whatever it is, that those questions are in there, that they're going to give you the meaningful measurement.
So do you have any questions when you're working with clients to kind of put together engagement surveys? What are some of the top kind of questions that you're like, we got to make sure that this gets included?
Yeah, for me, there's I'm going to try to answer it very specifically, but it also depends on what their values and what the culture they're building is, right? So that will change. For me, I love to see something that's measuring manager effectiveness. I don't care where you work, how your managers are working with your employees has a huge impact on your culture and the work they're producing. So measuring your managers and their employees' engagement with your managers and how they're performing is important. Measuring.
So what's the question there in the survey specifically?
Geez, there's different ones. I'm thinking, I hear, do I feel recognized by my manager? Does my manager see my work? There's lots of ones, but for me, the one is, manager. Does your manager, do you feel recognized by your manager? Or do you feel connected to your manager? Like not connected. Do you feel seen or understood by your manager? Is important. Your manager has to understand what's going on, right? That's probably it. And that's probably poorly worded on the spot, but we'll get that better.
maybe something around like trust, right? Like we talk a lot during our leadership training here internally about kind of building trust, both with colleagues, but definitely with manager and contributor relationships. Okay, and what about frequency? So at some point surveying's like too much, where people are just like, hey, I don't need a weekly survey. But the annual you're waiting kind of too long. So like, is quarterly best?
It depends what else you have going. If your only method of getting information is surveying, and you don't have other programs that have metrics or numbers coming in your way, then I feel like quarterly or semi-annually is needed, right? If your only real pulse on your company is once a year, then that's not often enough, right?
And have you seen, because there's generic, not generic, but like company-wide engagement surveys. But have you seen organizations do kind of more targeted kind of like pulse surveys that are not like anonymous with kind of smaller groups?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's lots of different ways. I've seen the annual surveys, I've seen the quarterly surveys, I've seen the random questions that pop up once a week, and you get answers on different things from some of the tools that'll ask you different questions on an ongoing basis. And I've seen some companies actually pick topics, and that topic gets surveyed at a certain time in the year. Um, Hard to say that any of them are wrong. For me, it has to match the rest of your cadence, right? If there aren't other ways, and when I say other ways, I mean if you don't have other stats coming from your benefits provider or coming from your recognition program, if you have one, or coming from your usage of your vacation programs, so those, if you don't have other stats that you're using to measure what things are going on, then yeah, then you've got to survey more often. But I can bet you most people have more stats than they think they have. They're just not reading the stats in that way or asking for more of the details below those stats. But if you've got a benefits provider, you've got you have a vacation program, you've got a learning program, you've got all these things. There are numbers in those programs that can help you understand what's happening in those programs, how they measure up to your values, right?
Awesome. Okay. Well, and I think this is going to kind of dive into Aaron's question. Um, so we've kind of tackled some of the survey stuff there beyond engagement surveys, and so you just kind of like highlighted a few there. And this is actually Robin's kind of question as well. What are the KPIs that we should be tracking for culture, kind of beyond surveys?
So you need some sort of program that's measuring on values for sure, right? We go through pains trying to figure out what those 3, 4, 5 core values are and what they mean and how. And those, by the way, that's not the be all and end all of your values, but they're the ones we're trying to flex. And so, finding methods by which you can monitor how people are understanding them and living them is important. That can be done through a number of ways. I'm going to use recognition because that's where I lean to. Those programs have a good number of ways of tracking the stats in those programs. Some of them might come through how people participate, and it might not be through recognition. It could just be in shout outs or things that are happening in your company where you're seeing feedback, 360 feedback, and you're asking people for topics and you're seeing some of those values come up. And so there are other ways of measuring those values that aren't in the survey. Attendance, but not necessarily attendance in the raw, like I'm here, like school class attendance, but how people are actually participating in your programs. And that could be in a number of ways. That could be utilization, that could be showing up to, some of the things that you're planning and or learning courses or lunch and learns that you're putting out there. Some of those, I'm going to call them attendance, but the participation or attendance, I think, is important. And you can definitely get some information on how people are responding or not responding to those programs, how much they're asking for them or not asking for them. And then you've got lots of data within all your programs: turnover, absenteeism, paid time off, you've got pay parity, you've got benefit stats, you've got lots of usage programs out there that have the stats that those companies can provide to you. And you can go digging through them and trying to see if there are trends or things that are healthy or unhealthy, right? Oftentimes you'll see in these programs, you'll see departments or areas that might need a little bit more of a nudge or encouragement or reminder, or a department or area that you're like, oh, okay, hold on, you guys are doing a lot of time away from work, but our software is 6 months behind. Like, there might be areas where you have to measure that and figure that out, but there are definitely programs, and I'll talk about recognition. I think for me, I like it a lot because it's one of those programs that has live stats all the time. Like, I can go into most recognition program tools and be like, how are we doing like right now, this month, up to date? I can see what managers are doing because managers have a part to play in most of those programs. I can see how employees are receiving it. We can see what people are saying. You can see what values are being associated with. There are lots of stats in there that you can use. Yeah.
Cool.
That was a long answer, but for me, I came to HR from a numbers background. I didn't go to HR from an HR background. So that's why, so much of my time was in rewards. I like numbers. And so I think there's a lot more numbers than people, realize.
Yeah. And it kind of ties back to the theme kind of out of the gate, right? We were just talking about how culture doesn't need to be kind of this soft thing that we cannot measure, right? There's lots. In fact, there's almost too much, and we want to kind of focus in on kind of a few things. Yeah, one question that we like to ask a lot of clients that we're working with is just, how important are the company core values to the leadership team, right? And more often than not, the answer is very important, right? Like people recognize that, what's the quote? Like culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
Right.
It's this really important thing. But how do we actually influence and change our culture and what's the word I'm looking for? Not instinctively, but intentionally kind of like shape our culture. And so the next question that we often like to ask or have our clients ask their people is, what percent of people can kind of recite the company's kind of values, right? And the stats are huge on this, right? I do a webinar series with know our hit of people, and one of the stats in the presentation there is it's like 88% of people that know their company's core values report being kind of engaged. And we know that kind of engagement is a big challenge for larger organizations. So if we can communicate the core values so that people know them, that's key. And the next logical question there is just how are we kind of reinforcing or communicating those values on kind of a day-to-day basis, right? And this is where recognition programs play a great role in just kind of keeping those values top of mind, right? So that people are kind of recognizing each other for kind of demonstrating them. So we touched on a few KPIs there. So everything to do kind of around values, Aaron. You want to kind of be trying to measure how often kind of values are being demonstrated. Event attendance, I think you said.
Yeah,
BC,
I like it. I like more participation more than attendance. I
So
can force the people to show up. I can't force them to pay attention to participate.
lunch and learn, social events, volunteering, things like that.
Yeah.
And then in the people kind of analytics world, you've got turnover rates, you've got absenteeism, L&D budget utilizations might be kind of another one. If you've got vacation programs, how often they're being used. We've got unlimited vacation here. So one thing that we track internally is just how much people are using that and making sure that they are kind of making use of that program. What about kind of like benefit satisfaction and EAP usage? So employee assistant program usage, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, EAP usage, I probably lean more towards its effectiveness. If you can get some information on if people are actually finding it effective, rather than the number of dials or calls into the EAP program, that means they're aware of it. That's a great use. That's great. But if people are actually using it, is a better one. Benefit satisfaction, I actually would probably look more like in some of the benefits usages, like how that's being used, right? And some of this, but again, most of those companies are happy to give you their stats because they like justify themselves as well. So you can get tons of numbers from all of those companies. But I think getting into it, really understanding what those numbers mean is more important. You said the scary word for a lot of HR people, which is people analytics, and for me, that I actually think it has to be nowhere near that complicated for measuring culture. I know people analytics does a lot. I'm not knocking that by any means, but for the vast majority of us, understanding some key numbers of a dashboard and be able to see those numbers are moving in the right direction is what we really need to do. That's the core of what's important, right? Getting down into the actual analytics of it still has great value, but for some of us leaders who are, the 2 HR employees in a company of 100 or 200, that good luck getting into analytics. But if you get a dashboard of numbers that's moving in the right direction, and the ones where they're not moving in the right direction, you can drill down and get into some understanding. That's gold.
So what's put yourself in the shoes, or you consult with clients all the time that are kind of, let's say, kind of like 500 to 1,000 employees, right?
Yeah.
Which is a lot of the clients that kind of we work with here at Gusto. What is the dream dashboard there for kind of measuring culture? Like, and let's actually pick an industry too. Like let's do kind of something like healthcare.
Okay.
Not sure kind of how much you've been consulting with healthcare, but what, pick out kind of like 3 to 5 for me
on the dashboard. Well, if I have, so I'm gonna keep plugging it. If I have a recognition program, that's up on the board for sure. If I don't have one, it's the one I'm trying to get because it does give me a number the fastest. Um, I do like any sort of it's healthcare, which is a lot of people. A lot of people do a lot of different work. I do think paid time off I would pay attention to. I think for me it would indicate whether people are taking time that they should or not taking time and they should, because I think that keeping people healthy and not burning out in that industry is probably pretty top of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would understand benefits utilization, and I say that because my assumption is that if you're in healthcare, one of the things that you probably value is the healthcare of your own employees, and so I think your own usage tells you that you're taking care of your employees in that way. And that's because I would, if I was designing the values of that company, I would put that high on my. I'd probably spend more on health, on our own health, than I would on other things. So that's why I put it high.
It's interesting to see kind of your thought process on this, right? And how measuring culture kind of ties to the industry that is being kind of selected.
Yeah, it's funny when I meet people, Skye, this is weird. When I first meet with clients, I kind of take these 6 or 7, what looks like sliders into my conversation, and I go, you've got pay, you've got bonus, you've got benefits, and you kind of take those things and say, what are we putting up at an 80 and what are we leaving down at a 40? Because, and it kind of, for me, a lot of industries, you'll see, if you're in healthcare, you probably are going to put your benefits. If you're in a company that does retirement savings, like I was working with one of these clients for a while, their retirement savings plan, they were an insurance company. Their retirement savings plan was ridiculous, right? And so it kind of made sense that they were taking care of their own, and those were dialed up higher. That's kind of how I went through it in my head anyway.
And we're very biased, right? Because we invest a lot internally here at Gusto in our own recognition program. And ironically, it wasn't always the case, right?
Right.
You can go back and kind of like read the stories of kind of early days at Gusto and how we didn't even use our tool internally when we started. We just had this kind of epiphany that like, shit, if we're going to help companies build recognition programs and build culture, like we should use that internally here and test things. But we've seen, tremendous impacts on that. What I found interesting about your comment, though, was that even though it was a healthcare example, recognition helps you kind of measure things in real time.
Yeah, there aren't many programs. This is my own opinion. I could be wrong. There aren't many programs that allow you to kind of just get manager information, value information, employee information, and all of the little like messages, like the actual, you do a survey, you get the like more information open text field that you probably never use or don't use most of the time. Recognition almost forces you always to use it. And so you've got a whole lot of information there that gets to go on a dashboard really quickly and help me explain what we're doing, right? And it's often, the other programs, BlackBerry, I did some programs. Like I did one that was Ice Cream Fridays. We did ice cream every Friday all summer. Great. The stats on that I was good. I can tell you how it went. I had people out there measuring the line on making sure we had people using the thing, right? But there's only so much I can do to put that stat on the board. That might sound funny to people. I tell people my budget for Ice Cream Friday for the year was like over $500,000, nearly $750,000 for ice cream on Fridays for 20,000 employees. But there are things you have to find a way to measure it, because I had to explain to people where this money was going. There was a lot of money on ice cream.
you were getting the good stuff. Was it like the Kawarthas ice cream there in Ontario?
No, it was I can't remember which one of the ice cream companies, but one of the ice cream companies literally sent 20 trucks out. I mean, this was on our campus. They sent trucks and trucks out to campus every Friday, and they fed ice cream for 2 hours at every building and moved to the next building, right? And so it was a wild program, but it was part of the culture at the time, right? I tried to take it away, like we'll talk about culture measuring. When we took it away, when things weren't going great, and I had VPs and other people buying freezers to keep in their office because they were going to keep that part of their culture alive, even though corporately we couldn't keep it anymore. And so we had people who were doing it out of their own pocket. And I think for me, the big miss in that is I didn't do enough measuring. So I didn't have I couldn't defend that. Not that I would defend that in where BlackBerry ended up with financials, but I couldn't do much like, hey guys, this is really important, until people started buying freezers, and it kind of, we did something that was cheaper but still effective.
You have an interesting comment kind of in there that ties into kind of like the next question here. So Cindy says, what are some anecdotal ways to measure culture? So we've talked about surveys, we've talked about some of the KPIs, the dashboards. But what are other ways? Anecdotal, because a lot of the time, it's the kind of stories, right, that stick with leadership when they're kind of making decisions on these programs. So where are you kind of pulling out those anecdotal pieces?
It really does come. I mean, the biggest one's gonna be the stories. What people talk, see, and do, how they act toward each other, and the big ones, or not big ones, but the things that make that might get more viral around us, where more people hear about it, they'll happen. But you can talk to people, and they'll tell you what's happened or what other people have done that matches your values, that was important to them. In your healthcare question, it could be somebody who went away. I can think of an example of a person who was in a company that had a very great healthcare program, and she would have never left that program because that healthcare program helped save her life, right? She had a cancer scare and went through that, but by them having such a focus, her program was next to none, right? And so you start to see where your values and what you built as a culture start to actually hit home for people. And so there are social media posts. You'll hear about them telling their friends and their family. You'll see it on other recognition that happens outside of a recognition tool, that people just thanking each other. And you also, and this is my own thought, but you also hear when people start correcting each other for out of pocket value stuff, right? Where it kind of self corrects. You don't have to. The HR doesn't have to come. It kind of like, hey, that we don't act like that, and they start self correcting. I think that's also great. There are other boards and posts and Glassdoor and stuff like that. I place less value of them culturally. I place more of them value on that on talent acquisition, et cetera. But you'll still get that feedback from it.
And what about exit interviews, stay interviews? Are you pulling kind of anecdotal pieces, or do you have questions crafted in there for kind of data collection?
Yeah, I mean, exit interviews are good, and they're good if you've got but for me, this is also based on the culture. You've got a culture where people are open and ready to give feedback, and you think you're getting healthy exit interviews, and not getting the go away, I don't want to answer this answers. I think as HR leaders, we all kind of know what I'm talking about, where these exit interviews becomes almost not useless, but they're so biased to any answer, not a real answer. They become. I find stay interviews more useful, because there are people who are here, and they're telling you why they're here and what's going to keep them here. And I think that's more important than why I left sometimes, often because we don't get a real answer about why I left. Right.
And so,
again, to me, that's how everyone else is going to feel. That's just my opinion on those two types of interviews.
All good. And I think the takeaway on this one, because I've seen it internally at our organization too, right? Where you can build a case, and we've got some more questions kind of around this, but you can build a case to kind of the leadership team on culture program, or any program for that matter, and have a bunch of data there. But if you don't have the human side, the stories, the anecdotes, it kind of misses the mark on connecting.
Correct. It's funny, you need both. Going in, and I think we've all seen this in others, going into any leadership room that's got 4, 5, 6, 7 leaders or more. If you just go in with stories and anecdotes, 1, 2, 3 of those people in that room may not connect with that, and that's going to be very hard for you to get all the way through the other side. If you go into a room with just purely stats and be like, these are the numbers, there'll be some people who don't connect with that either. So you need to walk in with a healthy balance of the two, and be able to adjust one or lean into whichever one the room needs more of, right? But you've got to have both.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about this. We've got a question here from Shannon. So, how can I best use metrics to get leadership to prioritize my culture programs?
How do you best use metrics to get them to buy in? I was working through the question in my head. I do think, if you don't have metrics, I think I don't have metrics, and I'm going to use these programs to get my metrics. And here's the numbers I'm trying to collect and what we're going to come back to you with. Don't shy away from that. You may not have great metrics to start. I think you probably have more than you think initially, but if you don't have what you need, at least own that that this program is going to help you build those metrics, and you've got a way to put a stake in the sand today and measure it tomorrow, or next month, or whatever that time is, right? And so I think the ability to get metrics is also a selling point. And then once you've got a program, for me, you've using the metrics to get. Sorry, was it buy-in, Kay, or this is keeping the program? Just can't remember your question.
Yeah, and I think the question is around kind of getting buy-in, right, to prioritize culture programs. So
Yeah.
like, it could be both. I mean, let's kind of go down both paths here. So around kind of buy-in, what?
For me, those are typically your showing stats that you want to improve. If you're getting buy-in, it rarely is, hey, we're doing great, we need a program. It usually is, here's some stats, or here's some anecdotes, or here's some things that have recently happened that we need to improve. And so those type of stats are helpful in getting buy-in, as well as what does it look like when you get on the other side of those stats. There are typically stats that aren't glaringly obvious to the program. So there are your impact on recruiting, and your those things that are your opportunity cost type of stats. Well, other things are not happening because you aren't doing this, right? And so I'll give you an example. Not having a great culture might mean that you've got a slower pipeline on hiring, and that's okay right now because we're not hiring. But as soon as you've got those nice two big, I've got a client right now, they were slower on hiring, and they just landed 2 humongous deals, and now they're feverishly trying to find out how to get an extra 10 people in the door. But their pipelines are more than dry. And that's why I said to them, good luck getting people other than people, because you haven't spent the time building out the culture and the pipeline and people wanting to be here. There's some downstream impacts on that, right? And so there's an opportunity cost by not taking care of some of these things that culture will lead to, right? And so for me,
I think there's kind of we highlight this all the time with recognition programs to clients, right? Like we'll walk through kind of the basic kind of return on investment, right? Like what a recognition program can do. You invest 1% of salary into a recognition program versus kind of doing a 1% increase in the annual bonus, or a 1% kind of pay increase, and that real-time recognition throughout the year, and just walk through the impact that can have on absenteeism, on turnover, on kind of productivity. And so like once we walk through all of that and talk to them about kind of where their current metrics are at, there's a significant cost of like inaction now,
100%.
right? Like if we don't, and so when you're an HR leader kind of presenting to the leadership team, I think that's a key point to kind of like push on is like, if we don't do anything, like our turnover is going to continue to be high here, right? And we work with a lot of organizations that have frontline employees, and they're all struggling, right, to kind of keep retail workers and healthcare workers and whatnot. And so if we don't do anything to kind of improve the culture here, there's a significant kind of cost of inaction. Have you seen kind of that story work well?
Yeah, yes. I mean, is it the only story you can walk into the room with? No, but it's important to point it out. It's important to understand, and it's important to have that articulated well, where they can understand the downstream impacts of 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's not just like, and it'll also be, but it's, this is going to affect us, and it's going to affect us in these ways, and be confident about the ways it's going to affect you. Definitely important to getting buy-in. Budget's a separate story, but buy-in, for me, especially when you can articulate how it's going to help the values of the company, how we work, how we produce faster, how we can attract people and keep them working and being happier here working. I think when you can articulate those things and add numbers to it, you've got the recipe for buy-in. And companies will say, hey, don't care. Don't just want them to show up, do their damn job, and get out. Like, I've yet to meet those leaders. And if I do, I'm like, I'm not working here, right? So most leaders are looking for a way to make sure that their employees are happy working here, right?
And speaking of kind of leaders there, how important is it for the HR leader to find champions on the executive team to help them kind of push things through?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully the HR leaders on the executive team as well. But but they definitely had at least a couple of people who are bought into that, into building their people, right? That's more important as you get to budget and as you get to communication and participation and those types of things. But as you're having the discussion about the programs and about the impacts and things, you definitely need to have other people who have bought in and who understand the value of what you're talking about around the room.
Okay. Well, let's get to budget here, because our last question comes from Barbara. How can I use metrics to get more budget for culture programs? So this is, I guess, is more to do with kind of that secondary path of expanding.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're starting off, for me, big things. Don't overpromise. I'll always start with that. That's just me. I start to like, let's defend and we'll play offense afterwards. But let's defend first. I don't want us to overpromise what we can do with the budget. I want us to commit to metrics we can achieve them, and say, look, we did that. Now we need more, right? And so for me, I want to set a realistic goal based on the metrics about what I can improve, how I can use the budget, and I want to make sure I have the budget to actually succeed, right? And if we can do that, even if it's a smaller than we intended to, but we can win and then get a bigger budget and then a bigger budget, I think that's the right path for most people, especially when trying to get budget on what could be considered by others by a softer metric, or a thing that is not as, I've got to put $1 into Google ads and $2 comes out. It's much harder to do that when you're asking for budgets on people programs. And so I think for me, you work with a reasonable budget that you can actually achieve goals, and you build it. So crawl, walk, run. I always say them in the wrong order, but crawl, walk, run. It would be where I would go. And then number two, I firmly believe there are two ways of finding budgets. People are spending on recognition, or they're spending on culture. You just don't know that they are, or it's not in the budget. It's just through a direct line item that somebody's approving, that somebody's putting on an Amex or a credit card, or somebody's getting approval for, and it's happening. And so there are budgets being spent. And if you get some understanding or some estimate of what that is, you can help not stop those budgets, but you can help, help those budgets work in a way that you can actually get some metrics so you can get more budgets for them, right? And so you're not trying to, from my perspective, I wouldn't try to take away any of those programs. I'm trying to get them in a gathered way that the numbers and the performance of those budgets are being measured and then hopefully expanded on. So that's one way, figure out what's being done already. And two, in some ways, I think there are some big numbers that happen in companies. That's bonuses, that's merit, there it is, budget, there's benefit spends. There's some huge numbers that happen. And for some of these recognition or culture programs, I should say, there's ways to look for a budget within those programs, right? Can I save something on our benefits program this year? Our renewal is great. That's not going back in the pot. That's going towards our X cultural program. And here's a return I expect to get out of it, so I can ask for more, right? And so I think there are ways within our current programs to adjust and to find ways to invest in our culture that we can improve and do more of. Long answer. Sorry, Skye.
No, lots of kind of little nuggets in there. I think to summarize or to kind of put a couple kind of key takeaways on that. If you're looking to get more budget, so if you're looking to get more budget, you need to kind of use metrics to demonstrate success. And so a key thing to do here is a phased approach to any program, because we've seen this countless times where leaders will try to roll out all sorts of kind of specifically recognition programs at once. And it's just so hard to kind of make them all successful when you're doing a million kind of different things. And so what we have seen work really well is a phased approach where, hey, let's dial your milestone program. Okay, we got that kind of automated, away we go. Maybe it's a month or two later. Let's give some of your managers some budgets. And we don't have a ton of budget to work with. So let's not spread it super thin across kind of, give every employee kind of 10 points to hand out every month, and it equates to $1, and it's basically kind of meaningless at this point, right? So concentrating that initial budget with some of the managers and allowing the organization to get some of the data going and demonstrate the impact that this is having by looking at the engagement surveys, by looking at some of the KPIs that we discussed earlier. And then once we've demonstrated success, it's easier to kind of go back and ask for kind of additional budgets to kind of grow these programs.
100%. I mean, I'm probably a bit ruthless when it comes to this. I think in the other areas that have metrics and budgets, they're ruthless about it. If you've got a marketing person and they're trying to build a program, they're going to focus that on where they can get success, so they can go and build it up more. And for me, as people leaders, if we're trying to build these programs out, we can stay principled and say, we've got to roll it out to all managers on day one, super perfect, super fair. Everybody has the same thing, and you each have $5 a month to spend on your 10 employees. Well, then what was the point of that, right? The program's going to fail. Managers won't be happy, employees won't be happy, and you've killed the program you were trying to do. Rather than trying to say, hey, listen, we're going to launch this program with, I don't know, with customer service. We're going to concentrate the budget. It's where we have the most turnover issue. It's where we have the most retention and other issue. It's where we're putting all that budget right now. And in 3-6 months, we'll show what the numbers are. Then we'll roll it out to sales and marketing and somebody else. It's a harder decision. Some people may not agree with it. Some people may want to say, too bad, do it for all of us. And for me, I'm like, how can we prove and how can we show success, especially when we have a program and metrics that are harder to get budgets for? Let's be honest about it, right? And so I'm being a little bit more strategic, a bit ruthless about, I'm going to go and prove and win and succeed at this so that we can do more of it. But doing the opposite, which is peanut buttering it over big numbers, which is what I'm sure you see it all the time, Skay. I hear it all the time. I'm just like, great, we wasted that time, that effort, and that money, because we're more or less going to fail.
And so to counter that, though, there are concerns around kind of inclusivity. And so why did the customer service team kind of get this program and us marketing team or us people in the warehouse didn't get this program? How do you kind of tackle those issues?
Yeah, it's funny. When I was going through the example in my head, I decided very quickly not to say something like a region or a other group. I chose a department, and on purpose, because I figured that'd be the least D&I issued type of area that we could focus on, right? Because to me, this was not about inclusion. This was about solving a business problem. I said, in my example, I said CS had turnover and hiring and other issues that we were trying to solve that were business issues. That's where I was focusing my business dollars. And so I wasn't trying to solve, a lot of the other issues that could be, that could be involved. I was trying to focus the business dollars on the best business impact, right? Is that fair? That would be my response. Again,
no, that's it. That's good. I think one area that we run into quite a bit with inclusivity, specifically around recognition programs, is ones where employees aren't comfortable with technology, or they might not kind of be in the company HRIS system, right? And so how those employees get to participate in a recognition program and making sure that they are still included, and there's options for kind of offline, so like printing rewards and whatnot, and allowing them to kind of redeem those without having to log into some system that may overwhelm them, or they may not have kind of proper login credentials if they don't have company emails and etc. So if you are kind of designing programs, keeping that in mind, right? Because like if you are within the customer service department, or retailers are often kind of an industry that struggle with this, where there's a certain kind of percentage of the frontline staff that just aren't in the HRIS system or whatnot. And so how we, or maybe they're in the HRIS system, but they don't have emails for everybody. They don't have a company email, right? And so how do we kind of keep them included in the program and allow them to at least participate at a recipient level, right? Like maybe you don't have a full-fledged kind of peer-to-peer program out of the gate, but having a way for them to receive recognition is critical to kind of building an inclusive culture. Yeah.
Now, I want to be careful here, and careful because I'm going to get myself in hot water based on how I'm going to answer this. What I'm about to say. I want to be, for me, sometimes that word inclusion gets broader and broader when it's like what you just described to me was a business issue about communication and employee status in terms of what kind of employee they are. They could be a contractor or a non-payroll employee, and there's lots of other things. That wasn't the D&I inclusion in my head. That's kind of why, for me, solving, like, I want to put that off of the table for a second and say that's not the inclusion that we're talking about. The inclusion that you're referring to me is usually is more access to the employee base or the people we want to recognize that aren't necessarily have the, admin at a desk with a computer and a login. And I think that's a challenge to solve in terms of how you get them, whether it's through offline methods and printing or kiosks or shared terminals or lots of other ways to solve that. But that to me is not a D&I type inclusion. And so, and I think that's when we let those words like that get too big, sometimes they get in the way of actually doing the right thing for the program. And so I think there are ways that we can do, like the program you just described. I think there are ways to launch a program that is focused on that. And we've made sure that the participants have access to the program, right? And I think we have to, especially the provider you choose to work with, should be able to have tools to get to the participants you want. That makes sense.
And then back to the theme here that we're discussing, kind of metrics to kind of measure their involvement, their participation in this. So we're kind of coming up here on time, Kwesi, and I'd love to kind of finish with a bit of a recap here. So we talked about kind of like why it's important to kind of measure culture initiatives and just how that can help you to kind of remove bias, really understand kind of how your culture is doing, and also build evidence and support for kind of launching more culture programs. Our first question there was just how to use surveys. So we dove into kind of that and talked about kind of digging beyond kind of like the eNPS score into some more specific questions. We talked about other KPIs beyond kind of surveys, right? And thank you, Aaron, for your question there. Everything from kind of values to participation in events to the various kind of HR and people analytics around kind of turnover, L&D budget utilization, recognition program participation. We looked then at a question around kind of anecdotal ways to measure culture. So lots of great examples there. And I love the point that you make around this, right? If you're going into the leadership meeting, it's important to kind of have a balance between both anecdotal and metrics, and so that we can kind of speak to kind of both of those. We looked at how I can best use metrics to get leadership to prioritize culture programs. And so talking about kind of like the cost of inaction and kind of leaning a little bit into that, and then wrapped up the discussion with how can I use metrics to get more budget, and just this idea of kind of crawl, walk, run, and how do we kind of do things in a phased way. Kwesi, it's a lot of fun talking to you. I learn something every time.
Hopefully I stay on topic more. Like me under the but that's okay.
I think next week is going to be my co-founder Joe and your colleague Shelly there. So tune in for that. And if you want to connect with Kwesi or I on LinkedIn, feel free to shoot us a DM with any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in kind of future AMAS episodes here, Culture Clinic episodes. And if you're looking for kind of more culture building tips, I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. There's lots of videos that we're kind of putting up there with different ideas, different things that we're learning both internally here at Gusto from working with people like Kwesi and all of our clients. So look forward to connecting with you. Thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks everyone.